I'd like to yield my time to Mr. Fortenberry from Kansas.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Yoho, my good friend, I'm from Nebraska, but that's okay. You fly over us occasionally, I'm sure, and the prairie looks like the prairie from above. That's all right. Thank you for conducting this special order, and I'm sorry to disrupt your train of thought. I appreciated you inviting me to come down here. Just a few observations, if you will. As I've watched the speeches tonight, there's been a litany of concerns about China's aggression, China's positioning, China's covert activities, China's willingness to engage in intellectual theft, China's pervasive influence all around the world. I've been to China once. I found it to be highly engaging. I found the people that we were with to be very welcoming and warm. I am very grateful and try to be attentive to China's long-suffering and their rich cultural history. And as they tell us, there's room enough in the Pacific for two superpowers, and I want to return to that point. When I looked out of the window of the place that we were staying in Beijing, it looked as though fog had set in. But it wasn't fog. It was pollution. The air was so thick, you could hardly see maybe 20 feet. If you live in Beijing, it takes 5 years off your life because of the pollution. In fact, I had one Chinese person whisper to me, what's the point of all this economic development if it kills you? And I really wanted to tell him, please don't say that too loudly. The point is that China has engaged in a series of unfair subsidies that create an unlevel playing field for trade. China's very system, a capitalistic, communist hybrid system, is very different than ours. They're state players that receive direct subsidies that we don't have. The indirect cost of not having environmental regulation is a form of subsidy to industry. Low labor standards, the exploitation of persons, is another, and on and on. So we can walk through the financial balance sheet as to who has what tariff and who doesn't and who subsidized this and who doesn't. But fundamentally, there are things in that equation that we perhaps haven't counted. The reality here is, another reality here is, China has, as their reason for being, it seems now, an economic nationalism. Now, we do too in America.
Sure.
Economics is important to us, but it stands alongside a spectrum of values of personal liberty, the exercise of opportunity, the ability to engage in communal activity, associations, free associations. We don't even think about these things. These are very, very different propositions in China. One places themselves at the service of the larger idea of the state. The person is subservient to the larger idea of the state. And the person can operate within a certain band of liberties. I saw it. People can move around. People can visit things. But it's a certain band of liberties that if you violate that and step beyond it, you contradict the nature of the system and could pay a very heavy price. And we see this in human rights violations, the lack of certain freedoms that we enjoy that we think are consistent with human dignity. And this is how it manifests itself. I know you, Mr. Yoho, are very attentive to the issue of development, sustainable economic development, particularly for the world's poor, to conserve our resources, to use the best of the market systems for empowerment of space, for the flourishing of the individual, that then creates the opportunity for just governance and a healthy nationalism. And that's our ideal. So before the State and Foreign Operations Committee on Appropriations Subcommittee, recently Secretary Pompeo appeared, and I asked him a question. I said, Mr. Secretary, how much does China give in foreign assistance? And he had one of those moments where he didn't exactly know how to answer. I wasn't asking the question in order for him to give an answer because we all know the answer. It's pretty minimal.
It is.
The United States gives away about $25 billion a year, and that's in non-security assistance alone, trying to help the poorest of the poor, trying to create the space for food security, sustainable agriculture, conservation, medical care for the sickest around the world. And we do this because it's our impulse, our humanitarian impulse. We just don't sit around while other people die. We also do it because it facilitates relationships, economic and cultural. And finally, when you have the factors that lead to stable societies, it's in our own security interest and security of the world. So for these reasons, we do these things. And so I asked the Secretary, how much does China give? It might be a sprinkling here or there. I don't exactly know the number. But for a country with this size of an economy, with this amount of power, with this amount of growth, with this amount of pervasive activity all around the world, particularly in the developing nations, there comes a set of responsibilities along with that. And I think that's really part of the tension here underlying this current trade dispute. What are we both vying for? I agree with the Chinese that there should be room enough for two superpowers in the Pacific. But you've got to come to some alignment about what it means to be in a fair, reciprocal relationship. And we have to do a better job of respecting the space of other people's history and tradition and the way they want to organize themselves around governance, while at the same time upholding this fundamental principle of human dignity, without which things just collapse into transactional relations that can come and go, or worse, when they're gone, lead to potential conflict. We need a healthy relationship with China. We've gone through a litany of complaints about China tonight, but there's a couple of other complaints I want to have, and it's looking inward at ourselves. I think it's time for American businesses to do business in America.
All right. You're singing a great song that I've shared with the AmChams, I've shared with other countries, and it's our philosophy of ABC. When you go to manufacture, it's anywhere but China.
It's a small manufacturing in my district, manufacturing facility. They make a fairly generic, standardized product. I was a little surprised that they didn't have a relationship with the Chinese, and they said, oh no, that R&D is rip off and duplicate.
That's exactly
That's
right.
why we won't deal with them. And that's a sad reality, because again, we ought to be able to deal with a fair set of rules with people who may be doing something better than we are, and we do something better than they do, and we can benefit in reciprocal fashion. But it's gotten so disordered because we shifted manufacturing there, and a lot of big businesses around this country make a lot of money off of poor environmental standards and poor labor standards imposed on other people.
Can I get you to yield for a minute?
Sure.
You're leading into where I was going with. In 1990, President Clinton recommended China's entry into the WTO as a developing nation status. Yet today, they're the second largest economy in the world, second to the U.S., and they're still a developing nation status, yet they have a blue water navy.
So why, ask ourselves why?
And they
What are the incentives around here to change this?
And they have a moon program.
Well, but why do we allow this to
Why
continue?
do we allow it?
Well, could it be that there's a lot of big-time transactions going on in our system itself that benefit a few very big multinationals who have taken their manufacturing and planted it over there? They make the stuff, we buy the stuff. And this is this third point I wanted to make to you, which is, again, a little bit of self-reflection on our own role in this. They make the stuff, we buy the stuff. We run up debt. They have the cash. They buy the debt. So here we find ourselves in this very dysfunctional marriage of having shifted vast amounts of productive resources there because supposedly we can't make this
Right.
more efficiently, supposedly. Really?
I don't buy into that either, and I'm glad you brought that
So
up.
we run up the debt, and they hold the debt. And what is debt? Well, none of us really around here wants to face it. On our side of the aisle either, Republicans. It's a form of taxation.
It is.
It's just hidden from everyone. And the manifestation of it is a wealth shift of our country's assets into the hands of other people. So we're talking about the military buildup. We're talking about the exploitation of resources, particularly in Africa, with no consideration of the environmental impact and no attacking of the subsequent problem of structural poverty that has existed in a lot of places. It's just taking things out and leaving not much behind. And that's not fair to the world's poor. But the problem is, again, is one of self-reflection that we have to have, both in terms of the responsibility that America's business has because we've provided the infrastructure and the systems through very large public subsidies so that they can thrive. And it's incumbent upon them to take responsibility. Maybe it's time for American businesses to do business in America. And secondly, this issue of debt. Now, if this tension prolongs and the reality of that China has a stick and they start to refuse or dump treasuries, what is that going to do? Interest rates will go up.
That's right.
And that's an impact on us. But it's one we're going to have to live with because we've done it to ourselves. So there's a couple lessons here. Fair trade, mutual respect, smart trade, both people's benefits. Secondly, America's businesses will not get this public subsidy from us any longer through unfair trade practices that we allow. And third is an honest confrontation about what debt really is. It is a hidden form of taxes, shifting the wealth assets of this country elsewhere into places like China, which we are complaining about are not using those assets the way we'd like to see in a productive manner. So lots of blame to go around here, but I want to thank you for the opportunity to at least start to unpack this in an honest way.
Yeah, and I appreciate you coming out because I see this as a series of special orders on China because the American people need to know this. When they go to a shelf and buy something that's cheap and they look at that and it says made in China, they're feeding this trade imbalance. So they're partly responsible for that. And as you well pointed out, if I fast forward to the Xi Jinping, to the current era right now, the estimates that there's a 300 plus, I heard it was 400 billion, trade imbalance. I can't blame China for that. I blame our leaders since President Nixon. For the last 40 or 50 years, somebody's dropped the ball or taken their eye off the ball, and you allow a trade imbalance of 400 billion plus, and then add to that the intellectual theft properties that we've heard up to 600 billion. I'm sure you saw the DHS as they brought in products made by our manufacturers that went to China that are now coming from China, and it looks identical, yet it's made by China, so it's robbing that profit, the jobs from American manufacturers that should go here, and it has to stop, and I commend the Trump administration for standing up. And I think you brought this out very...
Look, the reckoning is here.
The reckoning is here.
It's been hidden, but the consequences have been real. It's now on the surface. The day of reckoning is here.
It is, and I appreciate you, I hope...